Hey guys, welcome to Adulting for Teens. Today we're going to be talking kind of in the realm of cooking, but we're not actually going to make anything. But I thought this was a helpful skill for anybody that's just learning to cook and learning to cook for themselves. And that is how to read a recipe, kind of make a grocery list from that, and then almost a little bit of meal planning, but we're not going to go too much into that right now. But the first thing I wanted to talk to you guys about is reading a recipe, because cooking can be stressful if you just decide the day of, I want to make this, and then open up a cookbook. So I have one of the Magnolia Table cookbooks here. If you open it up and you're like, I want to make this, and you realize you don't have any of the ingredients, or even if you did look ahead of time and you got all the ingredients, sometimes you're like, oh, dinner needs to be ready in an hour, but then you look and the recipe, it may take an hour to cook, but there's a lot of prep that needs to be done beforehand. So I kind of wanted to walk through what you want to think about whenever you're looking at a recipe. And so I'm looking at chicken spaghetti. It's not a hard one, it's just a lot of steps and it does take a little bit of time, but I wanted to show you this one because this is one that we love cooking at my house, but it takes a long time and some prep to do. And so whenever you're looking at a recipe, you also want to look at like, how long does it usually has a prep time, there's usually a cook time, and if there's any time to cool. And so this one says there's 15 minutes prep, cook time is an hour. But I find that I always kind of make sure I give myself a little bit more time than that in case something takes longer, like if I'm not as quick about doing something. But that's just kind of a good idea to know when you're planning what day you're going to cook that meal. Because if there's a day where you work late or you have class late or something, you don't want to plan the really long, intensive meal for that day. So that's just good to know. And then it's good to note when you're looking at the recipe to kind of have a piece of paper or your phone nearby so you can keep track of the ingredients you have and the ingredients you don't have, and then make a list for the store. And so I kind of go through, and I usually bring the recipe with me to my kitchen, and then I look in the cabinet or in the freezer or the fridge, kind of check off what I have, if I have enough of that stuff, and then if I don't, I make a list of for the store, and I write down the quantity, because sometimes it'll tell you you need 4 cans of chicken broth, but you only wrote down chicken broth, and you get to the store and you don't remember how much chicken broth you need, and you get home and you don't have enough. So that's always good to note on there. And I would also say when you're making a grocery list, it helps me to, especially if you know your grocery store well, to put in categories on your paper or on your phone the order you're going to get it, and so everything's kind of in, so you're not running all over the store. So I do a lot of times, I try to get all the things that aren't frozen or in the refrigerated section, kind of get all those as I walk through the store, and then I wrap around and get all the cold items so that they aren't sitting out the whole time I'm shopping. And so I try to get like all the produce at the same time, all the canned goods at the same time, all the breads, all the baking stuff, kind of make my way, then get all the dairy, whatever, meat and all that stuff. And so it helps to make a list that way so that you're not just running all over the store and be like, oh, I forgot to get this can of beans when I was over there. And so it just saves you a lot of time. It seems like a lot at the beginning, but it makes life so much easier. And then when I'm looking at this recipe too, I'm trying to make note of what are the things that it's telling me I need 1 red bell pepper, and it says it needs to be finely chopped. So I probably need to do that chopping before I even start with the recipe part. So just kind of keeping that in mind. And so or if there's things like there's mushrooms in here, I want to wash those mushrooms and rinse them off and let them kind of dry a little bit before I use them. And so that's just things you want to keep in mind. Or like this one, you can use a store-bought rotisserie chicken. And so I really like to, when I bring home a rotisserie chicken, let it sit out for just a little bit so it's not like burning my fingers, but then, or even put it in the fridge for just a little bit to cool it down a little bit. But it's a lot easier to shred the chicken once, when it's still pretty fresh. And so I like to keep that in mind too on my grocery shopping days, to set aside time to do that. But this one just requires a lot of like grating cheese, chopping up cream cheese, chopping up veggies and all that. And so I tried to, on the day that I'm making this, chop up and get as much as I can ready so that when I start actually cooking, I'm not scrambling and like things aren't burning and all that sort of stuff. I'm trying to making sure I go through all the things I wanted to talk to you guys about. Another good thing to do too when you're choosing a recipe is to read through the whole recipe. I know that seems like a lot of work and seems kind of unnecessary, but sometimes you get in the middle of the recipe and realize it's telling you to use a kitchen gadget you don't have, or it's telling you to do a certain type of cutting or chopping that you don't understand what that means. And so you don't want to have to stop in the middle of cooking to look at that up. So sometimes it helps to do an initial read through of the recipe to make sure you have all the kitchen gadgets, you have all the ingredients, and you know what they're talking about and you kind of understand. And that helps when the day of, when you're cooking, you kind of already know the flow of what you think it's going to be. And I like to do like the day of when I'm making stuff. If I have a little bit of extra time, I'll try to pull out all the pans and pots and stuff that I'm going to need. And that just saves me a little bit of time later on. And so if I need a baking sheet, I'll pull out the baking sheet and maybe even cover it in foil or parchment paper or whatever I'm needing ahead of time. Get out a strainer for when I strain the spaghetti, that kind of stuff. I found that that's really helpful for me when I'm working. And so a lot of times on my lunch break, I'll look at which recipe I'm making that night, see if I can get as much of the like ingredients out that I don't need to be refrigerated or whatever. Get those all out, make sure I still have everything, all the ingredients, have all my kitchen gadgets or pans and pots and stuff out so it's ready for me. And then also that's a good time for me to realize like if I forgot something, I can maybe stop at the store on the way home and pick it up really quick instead of having to leave and go back or whatever. Let me see and make sure. Let's see. And then also, this is a big thing that gets me all the time, is if you need, like say you have meat in the freezer, you need to pull it out the night before normally, so to make sure it can thaw in time for you to use for dinner the next day. And that's something that I forget to do a lot. And so sometimes that changes what I make for dinner that night. Sometimes it helps to set a timer on your phone for the same time every night that says like, hey, pull out any meat for tomorrow's dinner. And that way you don't have to keep reminding yourself. And then, and if you don't need to do it, you just ignore it. But sometimes it's a good reminder for you. Another thing that gets me with cooking, maybe more so with baking, is if you need to soften the butter. And a lot of times you don't realize it till you're going to make it, that you just pulled cold butter out of the fridge and it needs to be softened. And that can take a little bit of time. So if you know that ahead of time, you can set it out while you're doing other things and then come back whenever the butter is softened and you're all ready. Another thing I want to mention about when you make a recipe, if you have something like a cookbook, you can add little sticky notes whenever you make something to just say like, I liked this about it, or I substituted this ingredient for whatever. Or if you want to like make notes like this takes longer than it says, that kind of thing. Just so you're helping yourself out later on, because if you want to make it again, you want to remember those things that you liked or didn't like about it, or what you would want to change. I also have a recipe notebook where when I find recipes online, I print them off, and then that way I can just write on them and then add them to a binder. I know a lot of people just save all theirs on Pinterest too. And so you can do that and then just make a note like in the comments of what it is, what you changed or what you liked about it or whatever. And then probably the last thing I want to say about this is that after you've made a meal, like I made something the other day, I think it was like a chicken tortellini noodle soup or something like that, and it had carrots and celery, and I ended up with a whole ton of celery and carrots left over. And usually what happens is it goes bad before I can think of something else to do. But instead this time I thought, what's another recipe that I can use these same things that I can save a little bit of money and not have to buy as many ingredients. And I ended up making like a biscuit chicken pot pie thing, and I was able to reuse all those ingredients. So sometimes you can save a lot of money by just going through your fridge, freezer, and pantry before you go to the grocery store again and say like, what's something I can make out of the stuff I already have. That's just a really good way to save money and to use all the stuff and not waste stuff. So I hope that is helpful. I am definitely not an expert on any cooking or anything like that. But it really helps. Probably the biggest takeaway I'll say is it really helps me to read through a recipe a few days beforehand and then again the day of, pull out all the stuff that I need for that recipe that I can. And if not, if I can't pull it out of the fridge, just check to make sure it's in there and you have what you need. And then to chop and prep all the food for it as much as you can. It makes cooking so much simpler. You're not as stressed out. And then you can actually listen to music and enjoy cooking or cooking with other people. And it becomes something you enjoy instead of something that stresses you out. So I hope that is helpful for any beginning cooks. And please let me know if there's anything else in regards to cooking you'd like me to cover, or if there's specific recipes you want me to try out and show you, I can do that too. All right, thank you guys for joining me.